The cold floor became her only support in that moment. Pain pierced her body, forcing her to cringe with every breath as the world around her slowly sank into silence. Her consciousness was slipping away, leaving only the bitter realization of betrayal. Those she trusted had become her executioners, and this injustice burned deeper than any wound. But in her fading gaze, a different flame suddenly ignited. The last spark of life transformed into pure, undiluted rage. She would not go so easily, not this time. The magnificent arches of the castle now seemed like mere backdrops to her personal tragedy. Looking upward, she saw the one who had stripped her of everything, and that distance only strengthened her resolve. Everything she believed in had crumbled into dust. In this darkness, there was no longer any room for mercy or hope. Even the holy faces frozen in stone seemed like silent witnesses to her fall. Loneliness enveloped her like a funeral shroud. Every tear that fell that evening was a vow that those celebrating her demise would soon taste the bitterness of their own defeat. A dazzling light swallowed reality, erasing the boundaries between past and future. It was the end of her old life and the beginning of something entirely different. Now her name was Hestia. Finding herself in the body of a character whose fate she already knew, the girl realized this was her chance. Her elegant appearance and gentle smile became her new weapons in a world where she would now set the rules of the game herself. After reading her favorite novel, she opened her eyes in a completely different world. Now she was merely a minor character whose name was barely mentioned in the plot, but this granted her long-awaited freedom. This new life brought an unexpected surprise. It turned out that the status of an ordinary person in this world came with immense riches she could never have dreamed of. The sight of golden mountains made her heart beat faster. Possessing such resources, she could become anyone and rewrite her destiny however she pleased. Every detail of this world seemed like a work of art to her. She understood, to preserve this wealth and change the course of history, she had to act cautiously and calculatingly. Wealth gave her power that other characters could only guess at. It was her main trump card in the upcoming game of shadows. Now, as a fabulously wealthy heiress, she was ready to enjoy every moment of her new existence without looking back at the canons of the old story. Life in her new status required decisiveness. She was not afraid to assert herself, facing those accustomed to the submissiveness of others. If words didn't help, more convincing arguments were used. She quickly learned that in this world, strength and confidence are respected. Every deal had to end on her terms. Observing the fruits of her labor, she felt control over the situation shifting into her hands. But even amidst the glitter of gold, she did not forget the main characters of the novel. Watching their first meeting, she knew her role in their fate was only just beginning. Before her stood Diana herself, the true heroine of this story. Her beauty was dazzling, and every movement seemed filled with divine grace. Seeing her idol in person, Hestia couldn't hold back her admiration. Diana was exactly as described on the pages of the book, the embodiment of light, for which it was worth making any sacrifice. Following the heroine, Helios took the stage, the crown prince and the main protagonist of the novel. His appearance was flawless, a perfect combination of dark hair and piercing golden eyes that made every girl's heart flutter. The sight of a true literary ideal sent Hestia into ecstasy. She couldn't believe she was standing before the very character who was the embodiment of all fan dreams of a perfect hero. The quiet click of heels announced the arrival of another important figure. Every movement of this man was steeped in cold nobility and hidden strength. He moved through the crowd as if oblivious to those around him. His presence instantly changed the atmosphere, forcing casual witnesses to involuntarily hold their breath. This was Caelus, a deep sorrow reflected in his eyes, which he carefully hid behind a mask of indifference. Despite his supporting role, he possessed a magnetism that was impossible to ignore. Noble and mysterious, Caelus seemed like a visitor from another world. He was the one for whom Hestia was ready to go against the predetermined plot. Hestia's heart belonged only to him. To her, he wasn't just a character, he was her little treasure, whose pain she felt as her own. Together, they formed a magnificent picture, a golden trio around which the entire world of the novel revolved. Their beauty and status made them almost unreachable for ordinary mortals. Watching them from the side, she felt the sharp difference in their positions. They were the center of the universe, while she remained a silent observer who knew their secrets. She understood that she couldn't just walk up and talk to them. In this story, she was assigned the role of a shadow that must not disturb the peace of the main characters. Standing under the night sky, Hestia simply enjoyed the moment. Even if she was just a secondary character, the opportunity to see her favorites so close made her truly happy. She was ready to protect this world, even if she was never destined to become a part of it. She knew the ending of this story. The death predetermined by the author seemed inevitable, and this knowledge weighed heavily on her heart. But even as an outsider, Hestia could not remain indifferent. Diana was not just a heroine, she was a symbol of hope for the entire country. Possessing the gift of healing, she selflessly helped those in need, earning the sincere love and veneration of the people, who saw in her a living embodiment of holiness. In this corrupt world steeped in greed, she remained the only pure source of light. Diana was always on the side of the weak, becoming the last pillar for those who had lost all hope. It was no surprise that the two most powerful men in the kingdom fell at her feet. The crown prince and his loyal friend each vowed in their own way to protect this fragile purity until their last breath. Helios openly declared his feelings. He was ready to share the throne and destiny with Diana, promising that by his side she would never know sorrow or want. Caelus' love was different, silent and deep. He did not seek power over her heart, desiring only one thing: to always be near and become the shield against which any hardships threatening his only muse would break. And while the heroes were occupied with their feelings, the world around them continued to turn, unaware that shadows were already beginning to gather behind the scenes of this beautiful fairy tale. She was perfect, too perfect for this cruel world. Her kindness knew no bounds, and that was exactly what made her the most desirable target for those accustomed to acting in the dark. It seemed that under the protection of such men, she was in no danger. But every fairy tale must have its villain, and this novel was no exception. From the shadows emerged Lady Latona, daughter of the leader of the aristocratic party. She was the polar opposite of Diana, calculating, cold, and obsessed with power, which she did not intend to yield without a fight. Latona believed the crown rightfully belonged to her. In her eyes, Diana was merely a nuisance, a commoner who dared to stand in the way of her ambitions and her rightful place on the throne. Conflict was inevitable. Latona's hatred spilled over, shattering the illusion of a peaceful life and endangering everything dear to the heroes. Latona's latest provocation crossed all lines. Seeing the humiliated Diana, Helios and Caelus realized their enemy would stop at nothing. Rage boiled in their veins, demanding an immediate response to this insult. Latona only laughed in their faces. She knew the power of her lineage and traditions stood behind her, things not so easily destroyed for the sake of a simple girl. The game entered its most dangerous phase, where not only feelings, but the very future of the kingdom were at stake. Latona's intrigues were like a poison, slowly infecting everything around. She didn't just desire power, her goal was the total destruction of Diana, to erase the very memory of the Light Maiden who dared to challenge her place beside the prince. Even the most devoted allies began to doubt under the weight of her deceit. A shadow of suspicion fell upon their relationships, forcing everyone to find their own way in this growing chaos where truth became increasingly elusive. The world was shaken when the truth began to emerge. What was seen could not be unseen, and what was heard forever changed the perception of those he considered his closest friends. Loneliness became his only companion that night. Gazing at the cold disk of the moon, he realized his former life had crumbled to dust, and there was no going back. Time was rapidly running out for Diana and her protectors. With every moment, the noose tightened by Latona drew closer, leaving no room for error. Hestia knew the critical moment had arrived. Knowing the plot in advance, she frantically searched for a way to intervene without being discovered, for even the slightest deviation from the canon could lead to even more catastrophic consequences. A plan formed in her mind. Now she was no longer just a fan watching from the sidelines, but a player ready to risk everything to save her favorite hero from his predetermined oblivion. It was time to step out of the shadows. Armed with knowledge of the future and inexhaustible wealth, she prepared to strike where it was least expected. Within the walls of the ancient estate, the fate of tomorrow was being decided. While the aristocracy celebrated its hollow victory, a new conspiracy was being woven in the silence of studies, one that was not written in any book. Alliances were made and broken in an instant. In this world, where a smile often hid a dagger, loyalty became the rarest and most expensive currency. He was left alone with his pain. Betrayed by those he loved and forgotten by the world, Caelus was slowly fading away, losing faith in justice, until the one whose presence he could never have expected appeared on his doorstep. Darkness finally consumed him. Left with no meaning in life and betrayed by those he protected, Caelus turned into an empty shell. His soul burned to ashes in the flames of others' ambitions. Every movement was a struggle. Strength was leaving him, leaving only cold numbness and the desire for this nightmare to finally end. In this silence, he mourned not only his loss, but his lost faith in people. The one who was ready to give everything for others now had nothing but his own pain. Hestia could no longer just watch. Seeing her favorite hero fading away, she made a final decision. If this world wanted to destroy him, she would be the one to save him. She had a clear plan and the means to realize it. It was time to use all her accumulated wealth and knowledge of the future to strike back and tear Caelus from the clutches of oblivion. Every second counted. Leaving behind the role of a passive observer, she rushed toward her goal, ready to rewrite the finale of this story with her own hands. She stood at the threshold of his seclusion, separated by only a thin barrier from the man who had become the purpose of her existence in this world. Fear receded, giving way to an unshakable will. This step changed everything. There was no turning back. By entering his life, she was forever severing ties with the familiar plot. The silence of the house was broken by her appearance. Hestia brought with her the light that the one who had long stopped waiting for salvation so desperately needed. Their eyes met in the dim light. In his eyes was a silent question. Who is this stranger who dared to disturb his sorrowful loneliness, and why does her presence make his heart beat again? She didn't say a word, but her smile said more than any reassurances. In that moment, Caelus understood. Before him stood not an enemy or a random guest, but the one who had come to share his burden to the very end. This outstretched hand became a literal lifeline for him. From that moment, their fates intertwined, marking the beginning of a new chapter where a secondary character and a forgotten hero would become the creators of their own story. The story had reached its perfect happy ending. The main characters had found each other and sealed their union with a vow of eternal loyalty. It seemed like the ideal conclusion the whole world had been waiting for. With the final volume closed, life was supposed to return to its normal rhythm, leaving behind the fairy tale balls and foreign intrigues. With a light heart, she bid farewell to this fictional world, looking forward to the long-awaited return to reality, her family and her friends. In that moment, she believed that the moment she closed her eyes, the magic of the book's pages would finally dissolve. But awakening brought only the icy chill of reality. She was still here. The invisible chains had not released her, leaving her trapped between lines that had already been read long ago. Days passed, yet the miracle of return never came. Every morning began with the bitter realization the door to her real home remained tightly locked. Time, relentless and indifferent, continued its march. Spring blossoms gave way to summer heat, and the flames of autumn forests yielded to winter's quiet, counting out the months of her solitude. She remained alone in a world that no longer needed her, a silent witness to someone else's happiness, locked inside the scenery of the finale. A whole year flew by in waiting for a miracle, but the thorns of this world only dug deeper into her heart. She had become a prisoner of a story that had never made space for her. The initial enthusiasm gave way to dull apathy. Every new dawn only confirmed the truth. She was stuck in a world where the story had already ended, and the extras no longer mattered. She settled into quiet seclusion, far from the capital's glitter, becoming an involuntary recluse in a dimension that was not her own. Without connections, without family or past, her existence had turned into an empty formality, a superfluous element in the perfectly tuned mechanism of the finale. Loneliness wrapped her in a thick shroud. The future seemed like a scorched desert where there was no longer room even for hope of return. Yet soon the silence of her exile was broken by news that struck her heart with sharp pain. The name of Caelus, the character who had been dearer to her than anyone, appeared in the news again, but not in the way she had hoped. Those he loved had abandoned him. Left alone with his ruined life, he had lost the will to keep fighting. In a world celebrating its happy ending, there was nothing left for him but unbearable suffering. While everyone else enjoyed the fruits of victory, her beloved hero was slowly fading away, cast aside by the author to the mercy of fate. The contrast between universal rejoicing and one man's tragedy was unbearable. She could not accept that the price of their happiness was his broken heart. The only desire burning inside her was to see him happy, but she was merely a powerless spectator whose cries could not break through the silence of the book's pages. Every night, she sent prayers to the heavens, hoping that tomorrow would return her to the familiar world, where all of this would turn out to be nothing more than a prolonged dream. But morning always greeted her with the same familiar ceiling. Cruel reality mockingly watched her hopes, reminding her that the fairy tale had ended, and she was the only witness to its true cost. Emptied by the injustice of this world, she sought salvation in the depths of the forest. Every step was difficult, as if the earth itself were holding her in this drawn-out drama. Tormenting questions without answers tore at her mind. Why was she still here? Why was she forced to live this meaningless epilogue when the hero of her heart had been destroyed? Her strength finally abandoned her. A bitter resolve boiled up inside. If this world would not release her, she would find a way to disappear herself. She was ready to put a final period, erasing her presence from a story that had brought only disappointment. But a sudden rustle made her freeze. Someone else had dared to disturb the peace of this God-forsaken place. Turning around, she lost the ability to speak. Reality and fiction collided in one short instant. Before her stood Caelus, the living embodiment of her pain and love, whose presence here seemed an impossible vision. The entire world around them ceased to exist. Only the two of them remained among the silent trees, the abandoned hero and his one faithful soul. Without saying a word, he turned and walked away, like a ghost slipping from the living. His indifference hurt more than any blade, yet she could not let him disappear into the darkness again. It really was him, not a line from a newspaper, not a figment of imagination, but a living person whose fate could still be changed. Her heart pounded wildly. Her mind refused to believe what was happening. Was this a chance granted by heaven, or yet another cruel joke of fate? A sudden gust of wind brought the realization. She would not leave. Now that she had found him, the story was only just beginning. The sound of pursuit drew closer, slicing through the forest silence. Those hunting for Caelus were already very near. Panic seized the pursuers. They had not expected to find their lord in such a state and in such a place. Suddenly, a cold palm covered her mouth, cutting off any sound. He pulled her against him, hiding them both in the shadow of the trees as the search party passed by. In that moment, reality felt like fragile glass, ready to shatter from any careless breath. There was no warmth in his embrace, only the endless emptiness of a man who had lost everything. But for her, this moment became the most important in her life. When the danger had passed, tension gave way to awkwardness. Thoughts tangled, words stuck in her throat. She was ready to do anything just to prolong this instant. In her eyes, he was still the same shining hero, even if he himself had long stopped believing it. Leaving the forest thicket behind, they crossed the threshold of her modest refuge. The house that had long been only a place of her loneliness suddenly filled with meaning. Her flustered attempts to tidy the room looked ridiculous against his icy calm. She desperately tried to hide her agitation behind everyday tasks. But behind that fuss lay a clear plan. She would not let him leave again. Looking at him sitting in her house, she still could not believe what was happening. The person she had only ever watched from the pages of a novel was now within arm's reach. The question of why he had been alone in the forest hung in the air like a heavy weight. But right now, only one thing mattered. He was alive, and he was here. She knew his heart was broken and his soul filled with bitterness. But now that fate had given her this chance, she would become his support, even if she had to rewrite the ending of this story from scratch. It seemed as if everything around them had frozen, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The feeling that she was finally losing connection with the familiar world became unbearably sharp. Her heart treacherously skipped a beat. Looking at the man who lived in complete solitude in the middle of this forest, she felt a strange, frightening closeness between their fates. Stepping closer, she hesitated before speaking. The silence in the room pressed down, and every movement seemed too loud in this secluded dwelling. The words of her companion awakened in the depths of her soul, which she had tried so desperately to suppress for so long. Old wounds flared up again, forcing her to face the bitter truth. Returning to her former life, to her family and friends, now seemed like nothing more than an unattainable dream. Illusions crumbled to dust, leaving only emptiness and cold calm behind. In his eyes, she read the same quiet hopelessness. In that moment, it became clear there was no way back, and both of them would have to accept this new, frightening world. The familiar intonations in his voice made her flinch. Even in this strange place, the simplest phrases took on a different, mystical meaning. Despite outward calm, tension grew between them. Conversation about the past and future turned into a dangerous game where every word could prove fatal. She tried to explain that she had not come here out of mere curiosity. In her voice rang the determination of a person who had nothing left to lose. His answer was harsh and direct. Admitting someone else's superiority did not come easily, but denying the obvious was pointless. Looking at him, she understood how complex and contradictory this man truly was. Beneath his coldness hid something far deeper than mere indifference. He seemed both strong and infinitely fragile. That vulnerability awakened a strange feeling of pity mixed with sincere admiration for his resilience. Seeing him in such a state was painful. Broken, exhausted by his own demons, he still continued to fight even when his strength was almost gone. Leaving him alone with his sorrow, she slowly walked away. He had always been someone special to her, the one who shone brighter than anyone, even when complete darkness surrounded him. The desire to see his smile again became her guiding star. She understood she was ready to do anything just to bring back the light that had once radiated from this man. Every moment spent beside him felt like a precious gift. She promised herself she would return as soon as possible, because now she had a purpose worth fighting for. Deep in her soul, she kept a secret she had long been afraid to reveal. The loneliness of this house weighed on him, but now the silence no longer seemed so hopeless. For this moment, she was ready to change the usual course of things. Every little detail, even choosing the ripest fruit at the market, now carried special meaning and care. She wanted to surround him with the warmth he had been deprived of for so long. Delicious food, a cozy blanket, and peaceful rest. Simple things capable of restoring the taste for life to someone who had almost lost hope. Dreams of walking together through beautiful places warmed her heart. She imagined the day she would gather the courage to confess the most important thing. She would tell him that in this world there was a person for whom he meant more than anything. And it didn't matter what others thought. Her feelings were sincere and unshakable. But cruel reality crashed into her dreams with a devastating blow. What she saw made the world around her go dark, leaving only icy horror and the awareness of the irreparable. Her breath caught, and only one name pulsed in her head. In that instant, time stopped, turning her entire being into one silent scream of despair. The fruit she had chosen with such love rolled lifelessly across the boards. All hopes for a happy future crumbled like ash, leaving behind only oppressive emptiness.